What if I told you the worst place to overwinter your potted perennials is indoors, and the best place is surrounded by the very material most gardeners avoid like poison: concrete? The stuff we're told leaches chemicals, holds cold, and suffocates roots. Except it doesn't, and the reason why flips everything you think you know about winter survival upside down. This isn't about insulation. It's about deception, tricking your plants into thinking winter is boring, not brutal. I know that sounds completely backwards. Concrete? The same lifeless gray material we use for sidewalks and foundations? The stuff that seems about as nurturing as a parking lot? Yes, exactly that concrete. And I'm not speaking metaphorically here. I mean literally placing your precious potted lavender, your beloved salvia, your expensive ornamental grasses right up against a concrete wall and leaving them there all winter long while everyone else is wrapping their pots in bubble wrap and dragging them into heated garages. Because here's what nobody tells you about overwintering potted perennials. The problem isn't cold. Cold doesn't kill hardy perennials. If it did, they wouldn't survive in the ground either. The problem is chaos, temperature swings, the violent back and forth between warm and cold that happens when you try to protect your plants by keeping them warm. Every time you bring a pot into your garage, every time you wrap it in insulation, every time you tuck it under a cozy bundle of burlap, you're creating the exact conditions that destroy root systems from the inside out. Let me paint you a picture of what's really happening. It's a sunny January afternoon. Temperature outside hits 55 degrees. Your garage, that unheated space where you carefully placed your wrapped pots, heats up even more. Maybe 60 degrees, maybe 65 if the sun's hitting the door just right. Inside those wrapped pots, the soil warms up. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for the roots to sense it. Enough for tiny cellular processes to start waking up. The plant thinks, maybe spring is coming. Maybe it's time to start moving sugars around, softening cell walls, preparing for growth. Then the sun sets, temperature plummets. By midnight, it's 20 degrees outside. Your garage drops to 25, maybe 30 if you're lucky. And those roots that started warming up just hours ago, they freeze, hard, fast, violently. Ice crystals form inside living cells, puncturing membranes, destroying tissue. But the plant doesn't die immediately. It just gets damaged, weakened, confused. Next day, the cycle repeats. Warm up, freeze down, wake up, go back to sleep, over and over for 4 months straight. By the time spring actually arrives, your plant's root system is shredded. Not because it got too cold, but because it never got to stay cold. It got tortured by temperature chaos disguised as protection. I learned this the hardest way possible. 7 years ago, I lost every single potted perennial I owned. 23 plants: lavender, Russian sage, catmint, sedum, coral bells. Plants rated hardy to zone 4, and I'm in zone 6. These should have been bulletproof. I'd researched overwintering methods for weeks. I'd bought special insulating wrap. I'd arranged my pots carefully in my garage, spacing them out so air could circulate. I'd followed every piece of advice I could find from university extension offices and gardening forums. Come March, I was excited to see how they'd done. I carried the first pot outside, unwrapped it, and immediately knew something was wrong. The stems were brittle. When I scratched the bark near the base to check for green tissue underneath, there was nothing, just brown, dead. I checked another pot, same thing, another, same. All 23 pots, every single plant, dead. I was devastated, not just because of the money, though that hurt, but because I'd tried so hard to do it right. I'd cared so much. I'd been so careful. And somehow, I'd still killed them all. So I dug into the research harder. I read scientific papers about plant dormancy and cold hardiness. I joined forums where serious gardeners compared overwintering methods. I talked to people who successfully kept potted perennials alive year after year, and slowly a pattern emerged. The people having the most success weren't doing more. They were doing less, way less. Some of them were barely doing anything at all. One woman told me she just lined her pots up against her north-facing foundation and forgot about them until April. No wrap, no cover, nothing. Just pots against concrete. Another guy said he clustered his pots in the corner where his concrete garage met his concrete patio, and they came back stronger every year. A third person mentioned tucking pots against an old concrete retaining wall and never losing a plant. Concrete kept coming up, and every time it did, people emphasized the same thing: north-facing, unheated, direct contact with the wall, no insulation. It seemed too simple, too counterintuitive. How could leaving plants more exposed work better than protecting them? But I was 0 for 23 with my careful protective method, so I figured I had nothing to lose by trying something different. That next fall, I set up an experiment. I bought 3 identical catmint plants in identical pots. Same soil, same size, same everything. I picked catmint because it's supposed to be nearly indestructible, hardy to zone 3. If I was going to test overwintering methods, I wanted to use a plant that should survive no matter what, so any failures would clearly be method failures, not plant failures. Pot 1 went into my garage, wrapped in burlap, sitting on a shelf away from the walls. This was my control group, the method that had failed me before. Pot 2 went outside in a protected corner, wrapped in reflective insulation bubble wrap, the kind specifically marketed for plant protection. This was the method my neighbor swore by. Pot 3 went against the north-facing concrete foundation of my house. No wrap, no protection, just the bare pot pressed directly against the concrete, clustered with a couple of sacrificial pots I didn't care about. Then I did something slightly obsessive. I buried soil thermometers deep into each pot, down into the root zone where it actually mattered, and I checked them religiously all winter long, logging temperatures every few days, watching the patterns develop. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about winter plant care. Pot 1, my garage pot, was a temperature nightmare. On sunny days, soil temperature would climb into the mid-40s. On really bright days, it hit 50. At night, especially clear cold nights, it would drop into the teens. I watched it swing 30 degrees in 24 hours more than once. It was chaos. Pot 2, the outdoor insulated pot, was almost as bad. The insulation dampened the swing slightly, but when we got those weird warm spells in January where it's suddenly 65 degrees and sunny, the soil inside that insulated wrap heated up significantly. Then when the inevitable cold front blasted through that night, the temperature crashed hard. The insulation that had trapped warmth during the day now trapped that warmth as everything outside froze, creating a delayed but still dramatic temperature shock. Pot 3, the concrete pot, was boring. Incredibly, beautifully boring. The temperature hovered between 32 and 37 degrees for weeks at a time. When we had that weird warm spell, it barely budged up to 39 degrees. When we had a polar vortex event and temperatures dropped below 0, the concrete pot soil dropped too, but slowly, gradually, never shocking down to the extreme lows. It was flat, stable, predictable, like watching paint dry, like watching nothing happen at all. Spring came. I waited until consistent warmth arrived, then I checked my plants. Pot 1, the garage pot, was completely dead. Roots were black mush when I dumped it out. Pot 2, the outdoor insulated pot, was alive, but pathetic. It eventually leafed out but looked stressed and stunted all season, never really recovering its vigor. Pot 3, the concrete pot, exploded with growth the moment temperatures warmed up. Dense, vigorous, healthy foliage, covered in flowers by June. It looked like it had just taken the most refreshing nap of its life and woke up ready to dominate. That's when everything clicked. Temperature stability is everything. And concrete provides stability like nothing else available to the average gardener because of something called thermal mass. Let me explain thermal mass in the simplest possible terms, because this is the key to understanding why concrete works magic. Thermal mass is a material's ability to absorb and store temperature. Materials with high thermal mass, like concrete, stone, brick, or water, change temperature very slowly. They absorb heat or cold gradually and release it just as gradually. Materials with low thermal mass, like wood, plastic, fabric, or air, change temperature quickly. Think about walking on beach sand versus stepping into ocean water on a hot summer day. The sand is scorching hot because it has relatively low thermal mass. The sun heated it up quickly. But the water is cool and refreshing even though it's been sitting in the same sun all day because water has extremely high thermal mass. It takes massive amounts of energy to change water's temperature. Now flip that to winter. Ever notice how stone buildings or brick walls stay cold well into spring, even after the air temperature has warmed up? That's thermal mass working in reverse. The stone absorbed winter's cold slowly over months, and now it's releasing that cold slowly, staying chilly even as everything else warms up. Concrete works exactly the same way. When winter arrives and temperatures drop, concrete doesn't snap freeze like the air does. It cools down gradually over days and weeks, eventually settling into a cold, stable temperature. And then it just stays there. When you get a random warm day in February, when the air temperature spikes to 55 or 60 degrees for a few hours, the concrete barely notices it. It's so massive, so full of stored cold, that a brief period of warm air doesn't change its temperature in any meaningful way. This is the magic. When you place your potted perennials directly against a concrete wall, the roots aren't experiencing air temperature. They're experiencing soil temperature. And that soil temperature is being influenced by the concrete's temperature through direct contact, through conduction. The concrete's thermal stability extends into your pot. Your plant's roots experience what the concrete experiences, which is steady, boring, unchanging cold. And unchanging cold is exactly what dormant perennials need. Dormancy isn't just sleep. It's a carefully regulated physiological state that plants enter in response to consistent environmental signals. Shortening day length triggers it initially, but temperature maintains it. When a plant goes fully dormant, it's doing critical survival work. It's shutting down growth processes. It's hardening cell walls. It's producing natural antifreeze compounds. It's moving stored energy from above-ground tissues down into the root system where it's protected. But all of this only works if the plant stays dormant. If temperature spikes trick the plant into thinking spring is coming, it starts reversing dormancy. Sugars flow back up into stems, cells soften and swell with water, growth hormones activate, and then when temperature crashes again, which it always does in winter, those softened, water-filled cells freeze and rupture. The plant has to start the dormancy process over from scratch. Except now it's damaged and has burned through energy reserves it can't replace until actual spring arrives. This is why temperature chaos kills potted perennials. Not the cold itself, but the lies winter tells when you try to keep plants warm, the false springs, the wake-up calls followed by brutal reality checks, over and over until the plant is too damaged and exhausted to recover. Concrete doesn't lie. Concrete stays cold, stays stable, and keeps your plants in deep, restful, healing dormancy for the entire winter. No wake-up calls, no false alarms, just steady, reliable sleep. Now, I know some of you are thinking about the common warnings about concrete. I've heard concrete leaches lime and raises soil pH. I've heard concrete contains chemicals that harm plants. And look, fresh concrete does leach lime initially. But we're talking about existing concrete structures, foundations and walls that have been cured and weathered for years or decades. The lime leaching that happens with brand new concrete stops being significant after a year or two of weathering. Your 20-year-old foundation isn't meaningfully changing the pH of soil and pots sitting against it for 3 months while plants are dormant anyway. The benefits so massively outweigh any theoretical concerns that it's not even a question. I've been using this method for years now across dozens of different perennials. My success rate went from maybe 40% survival to 95% or better. The only plants I lose now are ones that were already struggling or had disease issues before winter. So let's talk about how to actually implement this method, because while it's simple, the details matter. First, find your anchor point. You need an exterior concrete wall, foundation, or retaining wall that's going to stay cold all winter. This is critical. You don't want a south-facing wall that gets blasted with afternoon sun all winter because even though concrete has thermal mass, if sun is constantly heating one side, you'll still get temperature fluctuations. You want north-facing ideally. East-facing works okay because morning winter sun isn't intense enough to cause dramatic heating. Avoid south and west-facing concrete in winter. The wall needs to be part of an unheated structure or be fully exterior. Don't use the concrete wall of a heated basement or heated garage. The heat from inside will conduct through the concrete and warm up your pots, creating the exact instability you're trying to avoid. You need concrete that's cold on both sides, fully exposed to winter. If you don't have a north-facing foundation, look for other options. Concrete retaining walls work beautifully. Concrete steps or stoops can work if they're substantial and well-positioned. Even freestanding concrete walls used for privacy or landscaping can work if oriented correctly. Once you've found your spot, positioning matters. Press your pots directly against the concrete, not near it, not close to it, touching it. Physical contact is essential for heat transfer through conduction. An air gap of even a few inches dramatically reduces the benefit. Cluster your pots together tightly. Don't line them up with space between each one. Group them like they're huddling for warmth, because in a way they are. They're huddling for thermal stability. The pots in the middle of the cluster get even more stability than edge pots, but even the edge pots benefit enormously from being part of the group and touching the wall. Here's something that seems to contradict everything I've said about not insulating, but actually doesn't. You can put a thin layer of mulch or cardboard on top of the soil surface in each pot. Notice I said on top, not wrapped around the pot, not covering the sides, just on the soil surface. This isn't insulation, this is water management. During winter, you'll get precipitation. When snow lands on frozen soil and then melts, or when winter rain falls, that water needs somewhere to go. A thin layer of shredded leaves, straw, or cardboard on the soil surface allows water to percolate through instead of pooling or running down to create ice buildup. It also prevents freeze-thaw heaving that can push shallow-rooted plants up out of their pots. But we're talking 1 or 2 inches of loose material maximum. You're not trying to insulate, you're just managing water. Leave the sides of the pots completely exposed. No bubble wrap, no burlap, no blankets, nothing. The pot sides need direct contact with air and with the concrete. This is how the system works. And then you walk away. This is the hardest part for most gardeners. You leave them alone. You don't check on them every week. You don't water them, except in very specific circumstances. If you've had a solid week or more of above 40-degree temperatures and 0 precipitation, then you can give them a tiny drink. Otherwise, leave them alone. They're dormant. They don't need water. They don't want attention. They need to be left alone in stable conditions to sleep. Your instinct will be to check on them, to adjust things, to help. Resist that instinct. Every time you move a pot to check on it, you disrupt the thermal equilibrium. Every time you water unnecessarily, you add moisture that can freeze and cause problems. Your job through winter is to trust the method and let it work. The only maintenance you might do is after heavy snow. If your pots get completely buried under 2 feet of snow, you can gently brush off the bulk of it. Not because snow is harmful, actually snow is decent insulation, but because when it melts, you don't want gallons of water flooding into your pots all at once. Just knock off the excess and leave them alone again. Come late winter, when you start getting consistent above freezing temperatures, resist the urge to move your pots on the first warm day. Wait for sustained warmth. Wait until nighttime temperatures are staying above freezing consistently. Then gradually transition your plants back to their growing season locations. Move them to partial sun first if they're going to a full sun location. Let them adjust. Water them lightly. Don't fertilize until you see active new growth emerging. And here's what you'll notice. Your plants won't just survive, they'll come back vigorous, strong, full of energy, because they actually rested. They conserved energy instead of burning it fighting temperature chaos. They maintained healthy root systems instead of repeatedly damaging and repairing cells. They slept deeply and woke up ready to grow. I've seen it happen over and over. Lavender that barely made it through previous winters comes back from a concrete shelter winter and blooms prolifically. Salvia that was tentative and small explodes with growth. The difference is dramatic and obvious once you see it. Once you experience this difference, you'll never go back. You'll never wrap another pot. You'll never bring another hardy perennial into your garage. You'll just find your concrete wall, cluster your pots, and walk away. Because you'll know that boring stability beats dramatic protection every single time. Let me address a few more common concerns. What if you don't have concrete anywhere on your property? First, look more carefully. Many houses have concrete foundations even if they're covered with siding. Check at ground level all around your house. You might have concrete you didn't realize was there. If you genuinely have no concrete, brick works almost as well. Stone retaining walls work. You can even build a simple U-shaped enclosure from stacked concrete blocks without mortar to create your own thermal mass structure. What about pot material? Does it matter if you use ceramic versus plastic versus terracotta? It matters a little, but less than you'd think. The concrete's thermal mass is so much greater than the pot's that pot material becomes secondary. That said, plastic is most forgiving in brutal cold. Ceramic and terracotta can crack if water gets into the pot material and freezes, though this is much less likely with the temperature stability of the concrete method. Glazed ceramic is generally safe. Unglazed terracotta is riskiest, especially if it's old and porous. But honestly, I've used all kinds of pots with this method, and breakage is rare. What about evergreen perennials like lavender or sage that keep their leaves? Same method. The leaves might get weather-beaten or show some tip dieback, but that's normal winter damage. The plant will push new growth in spring. Don't cover or protect the foliage. Let it be. What if you get a weird warm winter where everything starts growing early? Plants against north-facing concrete will be the last to break dormancy. The thermal mass and shade keep them colder longer than plants elsewhere. If they do start growing early, despite the concrete, don't panic and don't move them. They're still better off with the concrete's moderating influence than anywhere else. And watering? I mentioned this, but it bears repeating. Your plants are dormant. Their water needs are almost zero. Only water if the soil is completely bone dry, several inches down, and you've had zero precipitation for weeks. Most people overwater, not underwater, in winter. Neglect is care when plants are dormant. This method works for nearly all hardy and semi-hardy potted perennials, Mediterranean herbs like lavender, sage, thyme, oregano, ornamental perennials like salvia, catmint, Russian sage, sedum, coral bells, dianthus. Even marginally hardy plants that are borderline for your zone can often survive with this method because the stability makes such a difference. Obviously, tender perennials that truly can't handle cold need to come indoors, but anything rated hardy for your zone or close to it will thrive with the concrete method. Here's why this matters beyond just saving plants. We live in a culture obsessed with doing, with intervening, with active care. We think love means constant attention. We apply this to our gardens and create problems by trying to prevent problems. We smother plants with care when what they need is stable conditions and space to do what they're built to do. The concrete method is a lesson in trust, in recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set up the right conditions and then step back. It's uncomfortable because it feels like neglect, but it's the opposite. It's deep care. It's understanding what's actually needed versus what feels like it should be needed. Your plants don't need you to rescue them from winter. They need you to create conditions where winter can do what it's supposed to do without chaos. They need stability, not warmth. They need consistency, not protection. They need to sleep deeply so they can wake up strong. When you see your perennials come roaring back in spring after spending winter against a boring concrete wall, you'll understand. The best shelter is the one that does nothing except stay exactly what it is. Concrete doesn't try to help, it doesn't adjust, it doesn't react. It just maintains its mass and its temperature and its absolute consistency. And that's exactly what creates the conditions for survival and thriving. So, here's what I want you to do. Go look at your property with new eyes. Find that north-facing concrete foundation or wall. It's been there the whole time, unremarkable and unnoticed. Look at it now as your winter strategy anchor point. That gray, solid, boring surface is about to become the reason your potted perennials not only survive, but come back stronger than ever. When fall comes, gather your pots, cluster them against that wall, press them right up against the concrete. Add a thin layer of mulch on top if you want. Then step back and walk away. Let winter happen. Let concrete do what it does best, which is absolutely nothing except being stable. Trust the method. Trust thermal mass. Trust your plants to handle what they've been handling for millennia before we started trying to help them. Check back in spring, not before. And when you see that vigorous new growth, when you realize you just overwintered perennials more successfully than ever using the simplest method you've ever tried, carry that lesson forward into every area of your life where you're tempted to intervene when what's needed is just stable, consistent conditions. And trust. Your plants don't need a warm hug. They need a steady hand. And the steadiest hand is the one that stays consistent without reacting. That's what concrete offers. That's what works. That's what saves them every time. If this changed how you think about overwintering, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me where you're setting up your concrete shelter and what perennials you're trying this with. And if you want more garden wisdom that challenges conventional advice with methods that actually work, subscribe. Because I'm done repeating what everyone else says. I'm interested in what's real, what's true, what actually keeps plants alive and thriving. Next spring, when your lavender comes back strong and your salvia blooms like crazy, you'll remember this. The moment you stopped fighting winter and started working with it. The moment concrete became the most nurturing surface in your garden. Thank you for watching. Go find your wall. Your plants are going to be just fine.